The contact was already inside our picket line when I came on watch, and according to every sensor log on the board, it had been sitting there for 6 hours without anyone seeing it arrive. No jump flare, no drive plume, no thermal bloom. A hull the size of a heavy cruiser, parked 40,000 kilometers off our starboard quarter, reflecting the amber light of the gas giant like a shard of polished mirror, and our hail had been going out on every band for 19 minutes without an answer. I remember the time because I wrote it in the log myself. Watch Officer's Hand, ZO341 ship time, TNS Carthage, Dreadnought DN-04, holding station in the shadow of the gas giant we had designated Halberd, in a system so far past the survey line that the chart still carried a string of numbers instead of a name. I wrote, unidentified vessel, origin unknown, approach unobserved, hails unanswered. Then I called the captain because there was nothing else in the book to do. Saul Brennan came onto the bridge in his shirt sleeves with his collar open, took one look at the main display, and stopped buttoning. I had served under him for 6 years, through 2 border actions and 1 very bad month at Teodora Station, and I had never once seen him stop moving in the middle of doing something. The mirror hung there on the screen, perfect and silent, and the reflection of Halberd's storm bands crawled across it like weather on glass. Time on station, he asked. 6 hours that we can prove. Sensor section is pulling the archives. It may have been longer. It was watching us sleep, he said quietly, and that was the first true thing anyone said about them. He brought the ship to quiet stations, not battle stations, quiet stations, the posture we used in disputed space, everything manned and nothing lit that didn't have to be. Around me the bridge filled in the dark hours way, people arriving half-dressed and fully awake, sliding into chairs, voices low. Lieutenant Dana Okafor took the sensor board from her relief without a word and started building a picture, and the picture refused to be built. The mirror hull returned no radar cross-section that made sense. It occupied space the way a hole occupies a wall. Sir. Okafor's voice changed on the second syllable, and I have learned over a long career that the moment an experienced sensor officer's voice changes is the moment a story starts. I have power readings now, or I have something. It's not a reactor signature. It reads like starlight. Like the hull is generating starlight from the inside. Magnitude? She looked at the number, then said it anyway. More than Halberd's core. More than the ship should be able to hold. Brennan didn't move from the command rail. Keep hailing, he said. Standard contact package. Mathematics first. And get me the Ished. The Ished were the reason we were in that system at all. A small methane-breathing species, traders down to the marrow, who ran convoys along the rim and had been buying refined volatiles from human tenders for about a decade, the only neighbors humanity had, and cautious ones. Their convoy, 11 fat freighters and a flagship under a convoy master called Factor Ulm, was working the moons on the far side of Halberd, and Ulm owed us at minimum a conversation, because his people had been flying this region for 900 years, and we had never once heard them mention a ship made of mirror. The reply came back faster than light lag should have allowed, which told me Ulm had already been composing it. Ours was a text channel. The Ished didn't do voice with humans. The words crawled up my console and I read them aloud for the bridge, and I will set them down here exactly, because I have never forgotten them. Do not signal it again. Do not light your engines. Do not show it your strength. You do not know what is beside you. It is the custody. When the custody comes to a new people, the new people go dark. All of them everywhere since before my species had ships. You kneel in the dark one full turning and then there is peace forever. That is how peace begins. That is the only way it has ever begun. Brennan read it twice on the repeater over my station. Ask him what happens to a people who don't go dark, he said. I sent it. The pause was longer this time, long enough that I watched the mirror on the main screen instead of the console, and the mirror did something while I watched. The reflection of the gas giant faded off its hull, not as if the ship had moved, but as if it had decided to stop performing the reflection, and underneath the borrowed weather there was a surface the color of a dead screen. Ulm's answer arrived in shorter words. No one knows. There has never been one. I want to be precise about what we knew in that hour, because everything that came after gets told wrong. We knew nothing. We did not know the thing beside us called itself the custody of the long light, or that its kind had been arbiters of the spiral arm since before the Ished had fire, or that the instrument it was about to use on us had a name that client species only spoke in their own holds, with their own doors sealed. We knew a mirrored hull, a power reading like a captive star, and a frightened trader telling the newest species in the galaxy to kneel. What we had, instead of knowledge, was doctrine. Human contact doctrine ran 4 lines long and Brennan could recite it shaving. Hold position, give mathematics, threaten no one, and keep the ship. Keep the ship, able to fight and able to leave at all times. 2 centuries of being alone and certain we weren't had gone into those lines. We had built every hull on the assumption that the first stranger we met might reach for our throat, and we had promised ourselves we would never reach first. So we held position, and we gave mathematics, and at 0512 ship time, the custody answered us at last, not on radio, not on laser, not on anything we transmitted with. The mirror hull spoke in light. It came up off the dead screen surface in patterned waves, white and gold and a deep ultraviolet. Our filters had to translate, sweeping bands of luminance that rolled across the hull in sequences. Okafor's board lit with structure the moment it began, repetition, recursion, prime-numbered groupings, nested ratios. A language designed to be seen across a star system, the way our whale song had once been designed to be heard across an ocean. It's transmitting at the whole system, Okafor said. Not at us. The moons, the convoy, the planet, everything in line of sight is getting this. A proclamation, said a new voice, and that was Yusuf Demir, our contact specialist, arriving on the bridge with his jacket inside out and his eyes already on the patterns. Demir was a civilian, a comparative grammar man the Navy had carried for years the way you carry a fire extinguisher. Proclamations have a shape, Captain. You don't ask questions of a whole system at once, you tell it something. Then read me the telling, Brennan said. Demir couldn't, not yet, not in those first minutes. But the Ished could, and across the system we watched the convoy react before Demir had parsed a single phrase. 11 freighters and a flagship, 900 years of knowing exactly what this was, and they did not run. Running was apparently not a thing you did. One after another in good order, with the discipline of a ritual rehearsed for 30 generations, the Ished ships began shutting themselves down. Drive plumes guttered out, running lights died. Habitat rings spun down until their windows went black, until on our scopes the convoy was 11 cold slugs of metal falling around halberd with only the faint waste heat of minimal life support to prove anyone aboard was alive. They were kneeling, a whole convoy kneeling in the dark, ahead of the order, hoping the thoroughness would be noticed. Ulm sent us one more message before he silenced his own flagship, and the words were misspelled in 3 places, which from a being whose trade grammar was always perfect frightened me more than the mirror did. Go dark now. It costs 1 turning. Only pride dies. Whatever you are, be it afterward. Then his lights went out, and the Carthage stood alone in that system as the only thing still burning. Captain. Demir had a partial by then. A single recurring construction the computers had isolated from the luminance stream. The phrase the whole proclamation kept returning to the way a hymn returns to its refrain. He read it off his tablet slowly, checking each term. It's an imperative broadcast form. Best rendering, be still. The custody is the light. All other fire is borrowed. Be still and be kept. I watched the captain take that in. Around the bridge, nobody spoke. 40,000 kilometers away, a vessel older than my species' written history was telling an entire star system that every fire in the universe belonged to it, and an entire star system was agreeing. All other fire is borrowed, Brennan repeated. He looked at the main screen for a moment, at the 11 dark freighters, at the mirror that didn't reflect anymore, and I watched him decide the thing that ended one age of the galaxy and started another. Although none of us knew that yet, and he did it with his collar still unbuttoned. Ours isn't. Maintain stations. Nobody touches a breaker. At 0547, the stilling reached us. There was no beam, no wavefront, nothing our instruments saw coming. What happened is that the universe acquired a property it had not previously had. Across the system, in a sphere expanding from the mirror hull at the speed of light, machinery began to sleep. We watched it on passive scopes. The faint waste heat flickers of the Ished convoy damping further as even their minimal systems were pressed down to embers. The automated mining beacons on Halberd's moons going dark in sequence like streetlights failing down a road, every made thing in that system bowing its head as the field swept over it. Okafor called the leading edge aloud, range closing, her voice flat and fast. 1,000,000 kilometers, 500,000, 100,000. I will tell you what I did, because I am the only one who knows. I took hold of the command rail and I looked at the deckhead lights of my ship, and I waited for the dark to take them the way it had taken every other light in the history of the galaxy. The edge of the stilling crossed our hull at 0549 and 11 seconds. The lights did not flicker. The deck hummed under my boots exactly as it had hummed for 6 years. The reactor telltales on the engineering repeater burned the same steady green. Down the length of 3 kilometers of Terran Dreadnought, fusion torches built by stubborn, frightened, redundant-minded human engineers went on doing what they had been built to do, in perfect ignorance of an instruction older than the human spine, and on the sensor board the only sound was Okafor breathing. The mirror hull went absolutely dark for 4 full seconds. Demir said later that in the entire luminance record there is no other gap like it, anywhere ever. The custody had spoken to a system, and the system had obeyed except for one ship. Then the light came back, and all of it was aimed at us. What came at us off that hull in the next minutes was not the proclamation anymore. The broadcast bands were gone. This was a tight, fast, narrow beam cascade of luminance poured directly at the Carthage, and even before Demir's computers caught up, you could read the grammar of it in your gut. Short phrases repeated, escalating. Not a hymn now, a challenge at a door. Same imperative. Demir reported, hunched over his station with translation lattices crawling down 3 screens. Be still, over and over, but the modifiers are stacking. Formal, then emphatic, then. He paused, checking it because he didn't believe it. Then something my best gloss renders as bewildered. Captain, I think it believes we didn't understand the instruction. We understood it. Brennan said, send our package again. Mathematics, then the greeting sequence. Slow and plain. We sent primes. We sent hydrogen. We sent the polite, patient, who we are of a species introducing itself exactly as the contact manuals prescribed, while around us an entire star system held its breath in enforced sleep. It felt, I wrote in my log that night, like answering a cathedral's bells with a knock. The second stilling hit us at ZO 608, and this one was no system-wide field. This was focused. Okafor's board registered it as a standing distortion wrapped around our hull alone, and this time we felt it, not in our bodies but in the ships. Gauges fluttered across the engineering repeaters. The deck lighting on 3 levels dipped, recovered, dipped again. Somewhere aft, a secondary bus tripped and handed its load to its sister, which is a thing it did in drills 100 times a year, and the lights of Deck 9 came back before the dip had finished traveling the passageway. In main engineering, Lieutenant Commander Anand Rao stood under the master plot and watched the fusion cores of the Carthage shrug at a force that had put down every machine civilization in the spiral arm, and being Rao, his first reaction was not triumph. It was professional offense. Whatever that field is, he reported to the bridge, it's trying to talk to the reactors. There's structure in the distortion, handshake structure. It expects an answer. It's knocking on a door we don't have. That right there was the hinge of everything, and Rao had found it inside 20 minutes. He laid it out for the captain in the flag office an hour later, with the stilling still pressing on the hull-like weather, and I stood at the bulkhead and listened to him explain why the galaxy goes dark on command. Every species the Ished have ever traded with runs lattice cores, he said, including the Ished. Beautiful machines. Clean conversion. No waste heat worth mentioning. Power densities we frankly can't touch. And every one of them, every core on every ship on every world out here, is the same design. The same. Down at the resonant level, they're all one machine, Captain, like every piano in the world strung by the same hand. The Ished admit it freely, they didn't invent their cores, they were given them. It's apparently the first thing that happens after a species stilling, the gift of better fire. And the giver keeps a key, Brennan said. The giver is the key. That field out there isn't a weapon, sir, it's an instruction set. It speaks to lattice cores in their own architecture, and they lie down because they were built to lie down. That's the design requirement underneath all the elegance. The whole spiral arm is running on power sources that kneel when their maker clears its throat. Rao rubbed his eyes. He'd been awake since the mirror appeared. And then there's us. Fusion torches and fission piles. Brute force and bottled suns, triple shielded, quadruple redundant. Every system hardened against weapons effects because we spent 200 years assuming the first aliens we met would shoot at us. Our fire doesn't speak their language, Captain. It doesn't speak any language. It just burns. They've never met a species they didn't light, I said. The shape of it was settling on me slowly, the way cold settles into a compartment. Every first contact in their history started with the other side's machines already obeying them. The stilling isn't their opening threat. It's their handshake. It has a 100% success rate across geological time, and we just didn't notice it, Rao said. Functionally, yes. Brennan was quiet for a moment. Through the flag office viewport, Halberd's amber bands rolled past, vast and indifferent, and against them the mirror hull hung lightless, still pouring its narrow, bewildered question at our hull. Threat assessment, he said. If the handshake fails and they decide to stop shaking hands. Unknown, I said. But Ulm's people have a 900-year archive, and they've never once recorded the custody firing a weapon. Not a beam, not a slug, not anything. Every account ends the same way. The stilling comes down, the new species sits in the dark for one rotation thinking very hard about its place in the universe, and then the lights come back on and the gift arrives and there's peace. Forever. Real peace, sir. The Ished aren't oppressed. By any measure, they'll show us. They're prosperous, they're safe. Nobody's fought a war out here in millennia. It works. Peace that can be switched off, Brennan said, by one party at will forever. He shook his head slowly. There's a word for an arrangement like that, Owen, and it isn't peace. At 07 Sings the custody escalated, and the manner of it told us more than a broadside would have. The mirror ship moved. Ulm's archive, when we got it later, recorded exactly 4 prior occasions of a custody vessel maneuvering in the presence of a client species. They arrive parked, they depart unobserved. Motion itself is apparently beneath them. It crossed 30,000 kilometers in a silence our physics didn't recognize, no drive, no reaction mass, and stationed itself between us and the gas giant so that Halberd's whole amber face became its backlight. Then it spoke down at us from that borrowed glory, and Demir, who had been awake as long as Rao, translated the cascade with his voice cracking on the second phrase. It's a question this time. The first question in the record. He steadied himself on the console. Whose are you? Not who. Whose? Demir was certain of the genitive. The bright speech apparently could not ask who are you without asking who do you belong to, the way some human languages cannot say I am without saying I am located. In the custody's grammar, a fire that belonged to no one was not a fire. It was an error. Brennan stood in the middle of his bridge and thought about it for a long moment. Around him the watch waited, and I will testify under any oath you like that not one person on that deck was breathing loudly enough to hear. Send. We are our own, he said. Nothing else, no names yet, no origin vector, no strength. Just that. Demir built it carefully, in their own grammar, out of their own light. Our signal lasers stuttering the luminance patterns back at the mirror in the visual bands it favored. A 3-word answer to a 100,000-year-old question. We are our own. The mirror went dark again. Not for 4 seconds this time, for 9 minutes. And then it called for help, because that, we eventually understood, is what we watched at 0731. The hull blazed with a single hard pulse aimed not at us but outward. At the system's edge, a cry and a register, the bright speech reserved, Demir said, for words spoken once a millennium. Okafor read the energy spike off her board and said quietly, that'll be heard a long way off. How long do we have? Brennan asked. We had 4 hours. At 11:40, with the stilling still lying over that system like a held breath, with 11 Ished freighters drifting cold and obedient around the moons of Halberd, with our hull still humming its small, stubborn human hum, space tore open at the system's edge in 3 places at once. The first jump flares the custody had ever shown us. As if arrival without spectacle was a courtesy we no longer merited, and 3 more mirrors came in across the dark. Each of them was bigger than the first. Okafor put the largest at 11 kilometers, and the readings that came off the 3 of them together made her recalibrate the board twice before she'd commit to a number. They took station around the Carthage at the points of an equilateral triangle, perfect and silent, with the first ship, our ship, I'd already started thinking of it, our particular bewildered cathedral, holding its post against the amber. Wardens, Demir said. He'd pulled the term out of the Ished archive, out of accounts so old they read like scripture. The Ished have a saying for when something unprecedented happens. They say, it has not occurred since the wardens last flew. He looked up at the screen, at the geometry of the 4 of them boxing our sky. It has now occurred, Captain. Brennan studied the formation the way I'd watched him study a minefield chart off Teodora, with the particular stillness he kept for things that could kill his ship. Then he keyed the all-hand circuit, and his voice went down through 3 kilometers of hull to 4,200 people standing at quiet stations in the only lit ship in the system. Carthage, this is the captain. By now you know our situation, because the Navy has never once managed to keep a secret between decks. A breath of laughter audible even on the bridge, exactly as he intended. Here is what I require of you. The people out there have asked us to put out our lights to prove we know our place. We are not going to do that, because we do know our place, and it is here, lit, minding our own business in open space. We fire on nothing that is not fired on us. We darken nothing. We kneel to nothing. We are going to sit in the sky exactly as we are and be exactly what we are for as long as that takes. The galaxy is watching its first ship that doesn't go dark, so look sharp. Carthage out. He racked the handset and looked at the triangle on the screen. Now, he said, let's see what the landlords do about the tenants who pay their own light bill. What the landlords did first was send a surveyor. It detached from the nearest warden at 11:51, a sliver of mirror no bigger than one of our shuttles, and unlike everything else they owned, it moved in a way we could watch, crossing the gap between us on a slow, deliberate line that Okafor said was almost certainly slow on purpose. They had seen us track the construct's arrival flares. They were showing us this one the whole way, the way you show a strange dog your open hand. Intentions? Brennan asked. It's not emitting anything I'd call targeting, Okafor said. It's emitting everything else. That thing is drinking us. Sir, full spectrum, passive and active. It wants to know what we're made of. Then it can look. Nobody illuminates it. Nobody locks it. Major Cole, he keyed the security circuit. I want boarding teams suited and staged at every airlock in both boat bays, out of sight. If that thing touches a hatch, I want our welcome committee to be people, not autocannon. Anaya Cole's voice came back with the dry calm she carried into everything. Understood, Captain, and if it forces a hatch, it won't fit, Brennan said. But if it tries, you stop it the way you'd stop a drunk at a wedding. Firmly, politely, and without making the evening about him. The surveyor spent 2 hours and 11 minutes on us. It walked the whole hull at a range of 800 meters, bow to stern, keel to spine, pausing over every battery, every bay door, every sensor cluster, hanging longest of all, 19 full minutes, over the aft radiator fields where the heat of our torches poured out into the dark in great glowing rivers. Rao watched it watch his radiators and narrated to the bridge in the tone of a man whose dog was being judged at a show. That's it. Look at that waste heat, filthy, isn't it? Couldn't still a candle with a signature like that. Terrible design, absolutely terrible. Take notes. It was the closest any of them had come to us, and it changed something I only understood later, reading Demir's reconstruction of the luminance traffic between the wardens during those 2 hours. Their exchanges, he says, shifted register midway through the survey, from the forms used for phenomena to the forms used for artifacts. Somewhere over our radiator fields, the custody stopped surveying a strange object and started surveying somebody's work. A made thing. A thing with choices in it. They could read the redundancy straight off the hull, the doubled and tripled and quadrupled everything, the armor over the lifeboats. And Demir swears there is a phrase in the traffic from that hour, repeated between wardens, that renders as, every part of it expects to be wounded. It was built by something that has been hurt, and means to continue anyway. They're reading our whole history off the hull plating, Demir said quietly, watching the intercept feed. Every war we ever survived is written in the redundancy, Captain. The ship is the testimony. At 1403, the surveyor stopped dead off our forward battery, and for 1 minute it did nothing at all. Then it did the thing that, by every account on both sides, decided the shape of the next 10,000 years more than any cord or any cable. It came about, returned to a point exactly amidships, 800 meters off our main personnel airlock. The human door, not the weapons, not the bays, and it dimmed. Emberlow, 1 minute. The gesture we did not yet know was a gesture. The bow it had no reason to believe we could read. And Brennan, standing on his bridge watching 100,000-year-old intelligence salute his airlock, said, "Exterior floods on the forward quarter. Bring them down to half for 60 seconds, then back up." We dimmed back. I have heard 1,000 clever people explain first contact, and there are days I think the entire field is that exchange. And everything else is paperwork. It saw the work in us. We saw the courtesy in it. Each side bent its own light to say so. Nobody knelt. The surveyor went home at 1410. And the formal record will show, because both sides' records now agree, that is what the honesty protocols are for. That what happened next happened not because the survey failed, but because it succeeded. The wardens now understood exactly what we were. A young heavy species with its own fire and graveyards behind it, and a thing that is understood can no longer be left as an anomaly. The Ishid archive was right about the custody down to the marrow. They were not cruel, and they were not even proud, as we mean pride. They were responsible. Forever. And 40 client species were watching one lit ship refuse the floor of the universe, and every hour it stood there burning, the floor became less of a floor, so the law had to be satisfied not out of anger but out of duty, the way a magistrate who privately admires us still reads the sentence, because the law is what holds the roof up over everyone else. Demire intercepted the order itself going out from the lantern's distant relay. We did not know yet that anything called the lantern existed, only that the wardens all received the same long figure from somewhere far off and answered it in unison with the shortest figure in their language. He could not translate the order then. He can now. It reads, "The anomaly is confirmed sovereign. The law does not know the word. Apply the law until the word is found." Captain, Okafor said at 1528, voice flat, eyes on a board going strange. "All 4 hulls are synchronizing." "Here we go," Brennan said, and took his chair and put his collar straight for the first time in 2 days. "All hands, brace for whatever this is." The wardens answered him at 1530. All 3 new hulls came alive at once, luminance rolling between them in synchronized cascades, the first ship joining a half-beat behind like a cantor joining a choir, and the combined stilling they brought down on the Carthage made the first 2 feel, in Rao's words, like a knock before a kicked door. The deep stilling was the first thing the custody did that our instruments could properly see, and what they saw was a standing interference pattern wrapped around our hull with the density of a physical medium, 3 fields braided into one and tuned, Rao said, like a cord. Inside it, the Carthage began, for the first time, to genuinely struggle. It went for the joints, not the bones. The fusion cores themselves never wavered. There was nothing in them for the cord to grip, but every system that lived on induction, every transformer and bus and relay that moved power from the bottled suns to the working ship, sat squarely in the field's teeth. Secondary Bus 9 failed at 1537, and this time its sister browned out taking the load. The forward water recycling plant dropped offline. Lighting on 6 decks fell to emergency red. At 1556, Fission Pile 2, one of the auxiliary piles, the humble, ancient, indestructible kind we kept the way a lifeboat keeps oars, registered a control rod fault and scrammed itself, politely and by the book, taking a fifth of our reserve margin with it. And the ship fought back the way she'd been built to, which is to say automatically, dumbly, magnificently, with redundancy stacked on redundancy by generations of engineers who had never imagined this enemy but had imagined every possible failure, which by accident amounted to the same thing. Load shifted and shifted again. Breakers walked their loads around dead buses like water finding a path downhill. Rouse people went compartment to compartment hand bypassing what the automation couldn't reach, and the great stupid unkillable torches at the heart of her went on burning at 100%, deaf to the cord, feeding a grid that bent and bent and bent and did not break. She's holding at 94% of combat capacity, Rao reported at 1615 hoarse. I can hold 94 for a week. I want it on the record, Captain, that they are not actually trying to kill us. This is still the handshake. They're just squeezing. How do you know? Because the pattern still got the interrogative structure in it, DeMeyer confirmed. They're asking the same question at higher and higher volume. A pause on the circuit. Whose are you? Whose are you? Whose are you? Brennan, in the command chair, didn't take his eyes off the triangle. Then our answer's not getting quieter either. Mr. Demir, same reply. Every hour. On the hour, we are our own, word for word. Let them hear it until it bores them. It did not bore them. But before I tell you what it did to them, I have to tell you about the Ished, because at 1714 that day, the thing tipped over from a standoff into something else, and it was the Ished it tipped onto. The Stilling, the original system-wide proclamation field, had never lifted. Ulm's convoy had now been dark for 11 hours. Standard, in every account in their archive, was one rotation of the contacted species homeworld, call it a day, a ceremonial unit, the point being made, and then mercy. But the ceremony assumed the new species knelt. We hadn't, and the custody, faced with the first refusal in its institutional memory, had apparently stopped the clock until it got an answer it understood, with 340 Ished's crew sitting inside the pause. The Ished are methane brothers from a cold, slow world. That does not mean they tolerate cold. It means they live their whole lives 11 degrees from freezing solid, on the margin a heater provides. Minimal life support, the devotional ember the Stilling permitted them, was rated for one rotation because everything in their civilization was rated around the one rotation kneel. At 11 hours, the convoy's thermal flickers, the only sign of life our scopes could read, began, one freighter at a time, to gutter. Okafor saw it first and said nothing for 90 entire seconds while she confirmed it, because she understood exactly what would happen on that bridge the moment she spoke. Then she spoke. Captain, the convoy's dying. Brennan crossed to her station and watched the thermal traces with her, 11 faint embers in the flagship, and the third ember from the left visibly dimmer than it had been at noon. Time? The cold ones first, maybe 10 hours. The flagship's bigger? It'll be last. But all of them, sir. The field's pressing their support systems down below survival load, and the custody is not letting go. Can they not just leave? Light their drives, run? Their drives are lattice-fed, sir. Their everything is lattice-fed. They couldn't light a match in that field if they were holding one. She looked up at him. Nobody in this system can make a fire except us. I have thought about the next minute of my life more than any other minute, before or since. Brennan stood straight and looked at the main screen, at the 4 mirrors of the custody of the long light boxing his ship in a geometry of absolute power, at the convoy of a frightened, decent, kneeling species dying of obedience 40 light seconds away. And I watched the particular cold come over him, that his enemies at the War College used to call Brennan's weather. He keyed the circuit to the boat deck. Commander Park, how many power skids can you have flight ready in 1 hour? Sun-Hee Park, our boat group commander, did not ask a single clarifying question, which is why her name is in the histories now. 6, Captain. 8 if you give me 90 minutes. Take 90. Load every portable reactor, every isotope unit, every spool of transfer cable on the manifest. He turned to me. Owen, you have the con temporarily. I'm going to go tell 4 immortal cathedrals that we're about to commit what I suspect is their only mortal sin. He said it lightly. He had that gift. But we both knew precisely what we were looking at. Because Demir had spent the afternoon in the Ished Theological Archive and laid it out for the wardroom in one flat sentence. In the entire history of the spiral arm, in the holy books of 40 client species, there does not exist a single account of anyone relighting what the custody has stilled. The concept itself sat in their grammar somewhere between impossibility and obscenity, a verb form that could not take a subject. The stilling was the floor of the universe out here. The dark was where the custody's authority lived, the way a king's authority lives in his seal. You could not counterfeit the seal. The language would not even let you say it. We were not going to counterfeit it. We were going to do something there was no word for at all. We were going to hand out our own fire, person to person, with jumper cables. Brennan composed the announcement with Demir for half an hour, in their light, in their grammar, as courteous as the grammar would bend. We told them plainly, the stilled ships are dying. We ask you to release them. If you will not, we will sustain them ourselves until your ceremony concludes. We make no claim on what is yours. We do not require their kneeling or their thanks. We will not allow them to die. This is not negotiable, and it is not hostile, and it is what we are. He sent it at 1809, and for the third time the custody went wordless, all four hulls together now, dark as sockets. And the bewilderment in that silence had curdled into something even I could read without Demir's lattices. The first refusal in 100 millennia had been an anomaly. This was heresy with a flight schedule. Their answer came at 1822, one single luminance figure repeated by all four wardens in perfect unison, flooding our optics, the shortest sentence they had yet spoken to us. Demir didn't need the computers. He'd seen the figure in the Ished scriptures, where it appeared exactly once per book, always at the same point in the narrative, always alone on its line. It's the closure form, Captain. The word they end the stilling proclamation with. He wet his lips. Forbidden. One word? That's the whole reply? In every scripture, it's the whole reply. Nothing has ever needed to come after it. Demir's voice was very quiet. It's not a threat, sir. That's what I can't make anyone understand. It's the end of the universe's sentence. There's nothing on the other side of that word, in their language or anyone's out here. No species has ever heard it, and continued. The bridge was silent. On the boat deck, 90 meters below my station, I could feel through the deck plates the faint thud and rumble of Park's crews loading reactor skids. Brennan let the words sit on the main screen for a moment, forbidden, rendered in our alphabet under the burning original, and then he did something I have never seen another commanding officer do in the face of an ultimatum, before or since. He had Demir teach him, phonetically, in luminance grammar, by hand on the signal laser's manual key, a one-word answer, not a refusal. Refusal would have lived inside their sentence, accepted the grammar, argued in the language of permission. At 1834, the Carthage spoke one word back at the custody of the long light. In their own light, on every band their optics drank, and the word was, watch. Park's skids went over the side at 1905, 8 ugly, beautiful machines, each one a cargo frame wrapped around a portable fishing unit the size of a delivery van, flown by 2-person crews who had trained for disaster relief at human colonies and were now, without 1 minute of rehearsal, about to perform the first act of its kind in the recorded history of the galaxy. They crossed 40 light seconds of stilled space in loose formation, running lights blazing, because Brennan had ordered every light on. If we were going to do it, we were going to do it lit. I had the con for the first hour of the relief operation, and I will tell you the truth. I spent it watching the wardens. 4 hulls, all dark, all silent since the exchange of single words, hanging in their perfect triangle +1 while 8 human boats flew through the middle of their cathedral with cables. Every instinct I owned said the hammer had to fall. The hammer did not fall. I think Demir thinks, and he has spent 20 years on it now, that for that first hour they simply did not have a category for what they were watching, and a being that has never once needed a new category does not improvise one quickly. Skid 5 reached the coldest freighter at 2010. The boarding went by pantomime and patience, suited human crews at an Ished cargo lock, drawing diagrams on a slate, an exhausted Methane Brothers manipulator finally working the manual latches from inside. They ran the cables through a service way never designed for them, bolted the fission unit to a hull never meant to host one, and at 2054, with the stilling of the custody of the long light still pressing down on that ship with its full weight, Petty Officer Ruiz of Skid 5 closed a knife switch, and the lights of the Ished freighter patient accumulation came back on. I want to be measured here, because I was a serving officer and not a poet. But our long-range optics were on that freighter when it lit, and the imagery went home with the first courier, and I have watched 100 million people watch that clip, and they all go quiet at the same frame. The dark ship, the stilled system, the 4 cathedrals, and then 1 row of windows coming on, ordinary and yellow, like a street at evening, in the middle of the universe's oldest night. The stilling did not stop it. The stilling could not stop it. The field had nothing to say to a fission pile, to fat dumb thermal watts pushed down a copper cable by hand. The custody's authority over that freighter remained, by their grammar, absolute, and entirely beside the point, because 11 degrees from freezing, the heaters were coming back on, fed by a fire from outside the whole architecture of permission. The Ishid crew did not cheer. That came out later in the depositions. I record it because it matters. They huddled away from the lit panels, at first as if warmth itself had become dangerous to touch. 300 generations of theology does not lift in an evening. It was Ulm, on the flagship hours later, his own deck warming under a human reactor, who sent the message that ended up carved over the entrance of the Contact Academy on Mars. The humans have not broken the stilling. The stilling holds. The humans are simply outside it, and they have reached in, and they are holding us, and the dark cannot argue with their hands. By 22:30, 4 freighters were lit and warming. By 23:26, and at 23:31, the custody stopped watching. Demir's theory, the one in his book, is that it was the 6th ship that broke them. That one relit freighter could be an anomaly, but a sequence was a future. Arithmetic anyone could finish. This species will go ship to ship, world to world if it pleases, and wherever it has been, the dark will mean nothing. I only know what Okafor's board showed. The smallest warden, the original mirror, our cathedral, lit its hull with a luminance figure Demir had never seen and could not fully parse. The closest his lattices came was a court usage, something like contempt of the proceedings, and launched. Not at the Carthage, at the boats. They were constructs. We decided afterward, each about the size of a heavy fighter, eyeless and mirror-skinned, accelerating at numbers no crude hull could take. 6 of them in 3 pairs on intercept vectors for the 3 skids still in transit between freighters. Okafor had firing solutions in 11 seconds. Our point defense groups had held lock on the wardens themselves for most of a day. Brennan, back in the chair, did not give the order. Steady, he said. They haven't touched anyone yet. Nobody starts this war on a guess. Steady. I understood the call. I'd have made the same call. And for 2 of the 3 pairs, it was the right call. They overflew skids 2 and 7 with meters to spare. Inspection passes, aggressive, contemptuous, but passes. The 3rd pair hit skid 3. They did not shoot it. The custody did not shoot. That doctrine held even then. They seized it, latched on, 1 to each flank, and lit a focused stilling field at a density nobody, theirs or ours, had ever tried at contact range, an attempt to do by main force what the great chords had failed to do at distance, put out a human fire by pressing the dark directly against it. And fission piles do not kneel, but they are machines of margins like everything built by anyone. And a control system convulsed in that field at skin distance, and the pile's failsafe did exactly what failsafes do, scrammed her hard and vented. Her core gassed to space rather than melt. The vent kicked the skid into a tumble. The constructs, their grip broken by the explosion of steam they had no category for either, sheared away. And skid 3, with Flight Officer Elena Janik and Specialist Bram Odom aboard, went end over end into the dark with no power, no comms, and the system's whole stilled cold reaching in through the hull. The recovery boat got to them in 51 minutes. It was not enough. Janik and Odom were 2 of the finest small craft people in the fleet, and they died in the dark between 2 lit ships they had spent that whole day lighting. And I will not write more about that here, because they have their own memorial and it says what should be said. I will write about what the Carthage did, because the galaxy was watching, and what the galaxy saw next is, in the estimate of every historian, theirs and ours, the actual moment of first contact, the moment the custody finally met the species it had been talking at for a day. We did not fire on the wardens. The constructs that killed our people were already retreating hulks of confusion. The wardens themselves had launched nothing else. What Brennan ordered instead at 001 was this: all stations stand to. Bring the ship to full combat power and light the array. You have to understand what a Terran Dreadnought is. The custody had been reading our hull for a day and finding a warm, strange, stubborn thing the size of a small mountain, running at the even tenor of a ship minding its manners, which is all they had ever seen, because quiet stations was all we had ever shown them. A dreadnought at quiet stations is a sleeping animal. Ours are built around weapons whose magazines and capacitor farms draw nothing until they are asked to draw everything, and a power plant size not for the ship's life but for the ship's worst 11 minutes. At 001 sticks, the Carthage woke up. Reactor output climbed past triple in 90 seconds. Capacitor farms that had sat cold and invisible since the mirror first appeared came up off the floor in banks 100 at a time. Targeting arrays unmasked. Launch cells opened their throats and held. The main batteries trained outward with the long, unhurried mechanical certainty of guns the length of city blocks, and along 3 kilometers of hull, every running light, every floodlight, every bay door and beacon and window of the only lit ship in the system came on at once. Deliberate as a sunrise, we painted nothing. We locked nothing that wasn't already locked. We fired nothing. We simply finally let them read what had been sitting beside them the entire time, patient and pleasant and dim, while they squeezed. Okafor watched their sensor regard converge on us, every aperture in the formation, all four cathedrals turning their whole attention inward at the thing igniting in the middle of their geometry, and she read the numbers as custody learned them, that the warm, stubborn mountain had been idling, that the fire it had been sharing out to dying strangers all evening through, cables was, to the fire it kept, a rounding error, that the species that would not kneel and would not darken and would not die had also, demonstrably all day, under provocation that had just cost it two of its own, been choosing not to do this. And it was not only the custody that read it. That is the part the strategic histories underweight and the cultural histories live on. There were 11 relit freighters and a flagship in that system, crews of a client species pressed to their viewports, watching the confrontation their scriptures had no chapter for. And every one of those ships carried a merchant fleet's long-range optics and a merchant culture's incurable habit of recording anything that might someday be worth something. The imagery of the Carthage coming to full power, shot from 6 angles by Ished hull cameras, was moving down the trade lanes within a month, ahead of any government statement ours or theirs, and the Ished cut of that night, which ends not on the blazing Dreadnought, but on a slow pan back to the little yellow windows of the patient. Accumulation, lit by the same fire, with a single line of trade script over the frame outsold. If that word means anything across 40 economies, every other account of the contact ever released. DeMeyer translated the line for the Admiralty when the first copy came back to us. It says, "The fire that would not kneel is the same fire that kept us warm. There is no second fire. That is the whole news from Halberd." Ulm sent us something too that night, while the array still burned and nobody on either side knew yet what came next. Not a warning this time, and not scripture. 3 words, plain trade grammar, from a 900-year-old being whose species had knelt on schedule for 30 generations, and who had just watched the alternative ride out an execution order with its running lights on. "We see you, acknowledge," Brennan said quietly, when I read it out. "Send, we see you too. We never stopped." The wardens went dark for 55 minutes, the longest gap in the record, before or since. And when the light came back, it came from the first ship, our cathedral, alone, not the broadcast bands, not the great organ chords of the stilling, but the narrow channel the one Demir called the door voice. And what it carried was a grammatical form the Ished archive said the custody had not used with another species in the entire depth of the record, the interrogative of equals. "They're asking permission to approach," Demir said. He said it twice, because the bridge did not believe him the first time. "Captain, they're asking." Brennan granted the approach, and then he did a thing that the diplomatic historians still argue about, and that I, who stood next to him while he did it, can settle. It was not calculation. It was the same reflex that had sent the skids out. He opened the door voice channel and had Demir send, before any agenda, any terms, any protocol, "You killed 2 of my people tonight. Their names were Janek and Odom. Before anything else passes between our species, the custody will understand that we know it, and that we have chosen to speak anyway. That is the measure of how seriously we want peace. Do not mistake it for the measure of anything else." The reply took 11 minutes, and when it came, Demir read it 3 times before he would voice it, and his hands were not steady. "It's a morning form, Captain. They have one. It's in the deep archive, the oldest stratum, and it has never, sir, the Ished have never seen it used. It says," he steadied, "2 fires are out that we did not own. The custody has not owed a debt in the lifetime of your star. We'd not know how to carry one. We will learn, or we will be taught." "We will learn, or we will be taught," Brennan repeated quietly. "Owen, I've read 1,000 years of human diplomacy, and I have never seen a great power say that sentence." He looked at the screen for a long moment. "Maybe that's what 100,000 years without a rival does. You never learn the words, because you never owe anyone anything." The approach itself took a day, and the custody spent it doing something that rewired our entire understanding of what we were dealing with. They ended the stilling, not regionally, not as a gesture at us. At 0400 the next ship's day, every field in the system released at once. The convoy's lattice cores waking under our jumper cables, the mining beacons on Halberd's moons blinking back on in sequence like a town getting power back after a storm, and then, over the following hours, Okafor's deep arrays caught the same release signature propagating out of the system in every direction, carried on whatever medium their signaling used, outpacing anything we understood. An instruction addressed to everywhere. It took us years to confirm what that signal was, as the accounts trickled back along the Ished trade lanes. On something over 900 worlds, in the holds of something over 1,000 client fleets, every standing stilling in the spiral arm, every probation field, every penalty darkness, every ceremonial dimming in progress from one end of the custody's domain to the other, lifted on the same day, without explanation. The clients called it, still call it, the bright pause. Their theologians spent a decade on what it meant. We knew what it meant because we had watched the reasoning happen in real time in luminance 40,000 kilometers off our bow. The custody had discovered that the dark was no longer the floor of the universe, and until it understood what that made of its own law, it would not enforce the law anywhere. They were, in their own fashion, more honest with themselves in that one day than most human institutions. Manage in a century. The leash had broken in one place, so they set down every leash they held everywhere while they thought. And then the ninth lumen came. It arrived at the edge of the halberd system 3 days after the array lighting, and it did us the strange courtesy of arriving slowly, decelerating in across the outer system for 19 hours in plain sight of our scopes, blazing with position lights in our own visual conventions, which Demir realized with a start it had learned from watching our hull. The wardens had been cathedral-sized. The ninth lumen was 41 kilometers of mirror and lattice and slow internal aurora, and the Ishid archive knew it by name, because it appears in the scriptures of 40 species, the lantern, the eldest moving thing in the spiral arm, the seat of the custody's voice, the vessel that had pronounced the stilling over every client species in living and unliving memory. Ulm, whose convoy was by then warm, fed, and refusing to leave the system, the Isht merchant instinct having concluded correctly that the center of the galactic economy had just moved to a numbered system in the middle of nowhere, and they were parked at it, sent us a single line when the lantern's identity was confirmed. When the ninth lumen comes to a species, the species is being judged. No species has ever seen it twice. Judged, Brennan said, reading it. He looked tired that morning. We all did. We'd been 3 days at quiet stations with the bones of the ship still bruised from the cord. Well, we've been judged before. Owen, what's our condition? Pile 2's back online, bus repairs complete on all but Deck 9, magazine and capacitor state full. 11 crew in sickbay, none critical. I paused, and every hull in this system, including 4 of theirs, is watching what we do next. Then we'll do it lit, he said, which by then had stopped being an order and become the ship's whole liturgy. The lantern took station 400,000 kilometers out, far, respectful. The distance itself a sentence in a language we were finally learning to read. And for 1 full day it simply looked at us. Not with the cord. Not with so much as a ranging pulse. Passive regard, Okafor called it. On the 2nd day it spoke, door voice, the interrogative of equals, and what it asked was not whose are you, and was not who are you. Demir brought the translation to the flag office himself on paper because he said some sentences shouldn't be read first off a screen. Brennan read it aloud to the command staff slowly, in the quiet. What burns inside you that is yours? We have kept the spirals fire since before your world had its moon. We have seen every kind of burning and stilled every kind. And all of it, in the end, was borrowed from the same first furnace and knew its origin and answered when its origin spoke. Yours does not answer. We have considered 3 explanations: that you are older than you appear, that you are an instrument of something older, or that the universe makes fire in more than one place, and we have been alone so long we forgot. Tell us which, and tell us truly, for 2 of your fires are out because we could not believe the 3rd answer, and we find we cannot carry a 2nd debt. I have read every state paper my species ever produced, every tablet and treaty back to clay. We have nothing like it. It was the oldest power either of our histories had ever recorded, asking the youngest, with 2 deaths on the table between them. Tell us whether we have been alone. Brennan worked on the answer for 6 hours, with Demir and with me, and by tight beam and a 9-day-old courier loop, with a government back home that had the wisdom, just that once, to tell its man on the spot they would back his judgment. The answer that went out from the Carthage at 1900 that day was 4 sentences long, and it is the 4 sentences, more than the relit freighters, more than the waking of the array, that the custody itself, we know this now, has entered into the deep stratum of its own archive, where it keeps the events it considers load-bearing to the universe. The 3rd answer is the true one. We are young, we are no one's instrument, and our fire is our own. We made it in the dark, alone, the same way you made yours, because the universe makes fire wherever something refuses the cold long enough. You have not been alone, you have been first. There is a difference, and tonight it has finally come to meet you. The lantern was silent for 9 hours. And then every warden in the system, and the lantern last of all, did the thing that ended the age, the thing the Ishid still cannot speak about, without dropping into scripture cadence, 1 hull at a time, deliberately, in plain sight of 40 client species merchant scopes and the patient lenses of a single human dreadnought. The custody of the long light dimmed itself. Not stilled, dimmed, running luminance down to a courteous ember, the way our cultures lower a flag or bear a head. It lasted 1 minute. The clients had no precedent for it in 100,000 years of theology, and the panic and wonder of it ran down the trade lanes like fire down a fuse. Demir, Watching the photometry with tears on his face and his voice perfectly level, gave the bridge the only translation the moment needed. "They're saluting, Captain." 11 days passed between the salute and the parley, and I want to put down what happened inside them, because the history skipped from one mountain to the next and the valley between is where my crew actually lived. We buried our dead first. Janik and Odom went into the dark on the 4th day. By the book from the forward bay, the Navy has fired its dead into the deep for 2 centuries. And the ceremony is short because spacers wrote it. 4,000 of us stood the rails of 3 decks. Brennan read the names, the dates, and the single line of the citation, which said that they died extending power to vessels in distress, and refused. I watched him strike the draft's adjectives out with a pen, to say one word more, because the facts outranked anything that could be hung on them. And at the moment the casks cleared the bay doors, every hull the custody had in that system dimmed to ember, and held the dimness for the duration of the ceremony, 11 minutes, and 11 dark Ished freighters, who could not dim because we were the ones keeping their lights on, did the only thing left to them and sounded their docking horns into the void where no sound could carry, so that our long-range optics watched the hulls themselves tremble with it. Cole, beside me at the rail, watched the embers and the trembling freighters and said very quietly, "Sir, I've done escort at 19 funerals. This is the first one where the whole sky showed up." On the 5th day, the Ished came aboard. That was Ulm's doing, a formal petition, the first vessel-to-vessel visit between our species, and the first time in the custody's recorded history. Demir noted that 2 client-grade species had exchanged crews under the custody's own optics without asking it. We rigged a section of the boat deck for methane breathers, and Factor Ulm crossed in a suit the color of old brass with 6 of the convoy's senior line and stopped just inside the lock at the sight of Park's crews drawn up in ranks. The translator took the Factor's first words and gave them to us flat. We were told humans greet with the hand. "I have learned what your hands do. I will greet every one of them." It took an hour and 40 minutes, 900 years old as their line counts age, and the Factor took the glove of every skid crewman, every recovery diver, every reactor tech on that deck, one at a time, and the translator said the same word each time, and the word was the Ished's oldest unit of debt, the one Demir told us their commercial code expressly forbids using for anything that can be repaid. Then Ulm asked to see the thing that had done it. Rao walked the Factor's party down the spine of the ship to main engineering, and I went along, and I will keep until I die the image of 7 Ished standing in their brass suits on the gallery above Fusion Core 1, the deck shaking their bones with the brute thunder of a bottled sun, the air around them rippling with heat their suits read as alarm. The crudest, loudest, most wasteful power plant any of them had ever stood near, a furnace their own elegant cores outclassed on every metric a civilization is graded by. Ulm looked at it for a long time, and then said the sentence that the Lampyard's founding charter now carries on its first page. "It is ugly, and it is loud, and it is yours, and no one can put it out. We have been wealthy for 30 generations, and I am standing in the first room I have ever envied." The courier from Earth made orbit equivalent on the 7th day, 9 days out, 9 back, the government's answer to a first contact report that had left us before the relief operation and crossed, somewhere in the deep, our second report saying we had relit a convoy, lost 2 people, woken the array, and been saluted. I stood at Brennan's shoulder while he opened the pouch. The orders, drafted in total ignorance of everything past day 1, ran 6 pages of caution, and then at the bottom, past the signature blocks, the first Sea Lord had added 1 line in her own hand, and the line said, "If the situation has outrun these orders, and it has, then you will remember that you command the only impression of our species anyone out there has, and you will act such that we can be proud of it 1,000 years from now, and the Admiralty will answer for you." Well, Brennan said, and put the 6 pages in a drawer and the 1 line in his breast pocket. Now we know the watchword. Proud in 1,000 years. He spent the remaining days preparing with a thoroughness I never saw him give a battle plan. He made Dimmer drill him in luminance forms until he could read the courtesy registers raw, unaided, because, he said, "You do not bring a translator to give your word." He had the wardroom argue against him. Cole as the custody's advocate, Rao as Earth's most cynical senator, me as the Ished, for hours, until every position had been attacked from every side, including the position that we should not go at all. And on the 10th night, the night before we boarded the shuttle, I found him at the flag office viewport with the lights off, looking at the lantern's distant glow against the stars, and he said the thing I have thought about every day of my command life since. "Owen, whatever gets agreed up there tomorrow, the hard part won't be in it. The hard part comes after, and it lasts forever, and it's this. We just taught a 100,000-year-old empire that their floor isn't the floor. The day will come when some human somewhere wants to be the new floor. The Concorde I want isn't armor against them. He nodded at the lantern. It's armor against us. Remember that when it's your turn to write one. I have remembered it. I am, in fact, doing so now. The parley was held aboard the lantern, 11 days later, and I attended it, which is the reason I am the one writing this down. Brennan took 4 of us, myself, Demir, Major Anaya Cole of the ship's Marine Detachment, unarmed by our own choice, a fact the custody's records noted with what Demir swears is the luminance equivalent of italics, and factor ohm of the Ishshed, because Brennan had told the custody, in terms that did not bend, that any settlement of the question of fire would be witnessed by a species that lived under the old law, or it would not be settled at all. The custody had agreed to that demand faster than it agreed to anything else. I think it surprised them into respect. The clients, in 100 millennia, had been protected, provided for, kept, and had never once been thought of as witnesses. I will not pretend I can describe the interior of the 9th lumen adequately. There were no decks, no floors, no up. We flew our shuttle into a receiving vault the size of a harbor, and the vault held us in a cradle of pale force, and we moved through the ship along avenues of slow light the way leaves move on a stream. The custodians themselves came to meet us in the only place aboard, we later learned, with gravity and air, a chamber grown for us in 11 days, with breathable atmosphere mixed to the sample our environmental plant had transmitted, and a floor, and chairs, human chairs, made by beings who had never seen a chair used, working from imagery, and they were perfect, and that is the custody entire. A power that cannot believe it has equals, discovering it would rather make furniture than make war. They are tall and slow, and hard to hold in the eye. Glassine is the word the press release is settled on, but the truth is that a custodian's body is partly light, structured radiance held in a lattice of something like mineral and something like will, and when one of them speaks in the bright speech, the words move visibly through its body on the way out, so that you watch each sentence being lived before it is said. There were 3 of them. The eldest bore a name figure Demir rendered as the keeper of the 9th lumen, and it had held that name, as far as the archive could establish, for longer than humans had held fire of any kind. I will set down the part of the parley that mattered. The transcripts of the full 11 sessions run to 400 pages, and they are public. Most of it is the machinery of the agreement, lanes and bands and protocols, the necessary plumbing of peace. But there was an hour in the 3rd session when the plumbing stopped, and the 2 species actually met, and it began when the keeper set aside the agenda and asked Door Voice the question it had crossed the spiral arm to ask in person. Why did you light the convoy? It was not yours. They were not your kind, nor your clients, nor your kin. The cost to you was the anger of a power whose size you did not know, and you paid it before you knew whether we would destroy you for it. We have modeled your decision 40,000 ways, and the models fail. Explain it, and you will have given the custody more than your fire. Brennan was quiet for a moment. I watched him decline, in real time, every grand answer available to him, every doctrine, every flourish, every line a lesser man would have fed the histories, and reach instead for the plain one, because the plain one was true. Because they were freezing, he said, and we had heat. The keeper's light stopped moving. All 3 of them went still. The way their hulls went dark, and the stillness stretched so long that Ulm's translator chimed a standby tone. That is the whole of it? The keeper asked at last. That's the whole of it. We didn't weigh it. Weighing it would have been the monstrous thing. You're asking what calculation we ran, and the answer is that being what we are means there are calculations you refuse to run. The dark was on them. We had light. After that, there's nothing to model. There's just the cables. And the keeper said, and this is in the public record, and the Ishid have already said it in scripture, and I still cannot read it without the hair rising on my arms. We stilled 10,000 fires to make the spiral safe and called it keeping. You shared 1 fire to keep a stranger warm and did not call it anything at all. We have been the light of this galaxy for 100,000 of your years, and we are not certain now that we ever once understood what it was for. Ulm spoke then, the first time in the entire parley, the small cold trader in the breather rig, the witness of the old law, asking leave of neither power. The factor's words came through the translator flat and even, and they bent the rest of the negotiation more than any human argument had. The stilling kept us safe for 30 generations. I do not curse it, but safe is what you keep a cargo. The humans did not keep us safe. The humans kept us warm. I have learned there is a difference, and I am 900 years old as my line counts age, and I learned it last month. The agreement that came out of those 11 sessions is called the Halberd Concord, and you live under it, whoever you are, wherever you are reading this. Its terms fill volumes, but its architecture is 4 beams, and I helped plane every one of them, so I will state them as they were meant and not as the commentators have dressed them. First, the line. Human space and the custody's domain met along a surveyed frontier, and neither power would project force across it. Not a wall. The lanes through it opened within the year, but a boundary of jurisdiction, the first the custody had ever drawn with anyone, because a boundary concedes an outside, and until us their law had no outside. Second, the fire. No stilling ever of any human hull, or any vessel under human escort, or any port at which a human keel was berthed. The custody accepted this without argument. Their own jurists had already concluded the clause was redundant. You cannot forbid what you cannot do, but Brennan wanted it written, because written law outlives capability, and someday, he said, one side or the other would be glad of the ink. Third, the clients. This was the hard one. This was 4 sessions and 1 walkout, hours. Brennan took us back to the shuttle for 9 hours over it, and the custody, which had never been walked out on, sent the morning form after us twice. Humanity would not flood the spiral with independent fire overnight. We lacked the means, and the custody's terror of a 1,000-year order collapsing in a decade was not, we conceded, an ignoble fear. Chaos kills the small first. Ulm said so himself. But the monopoly was ended, and the ending would be scheduled, species by species, lane by lane, starting with the Ished, who had earned it by dying of obedience in front of us. Any client species, on petition on its own choice, could buy, license, and learn human power technology, fire that answers no one, under a transition charter witnessed by all 3 signatories. The leash would come off the whole spiral arm slowly, the way you let light into a room where everyone has lived in the dark, gently, so it heals instead of blinds. But it would come off. That clause has no sunset. Demir made sure of the grammar himself. Fourth, the debt. 2 names, written into the body of a galactic treaty in human letters and in luminance figure, by the custody's own insistence. Bram Odom. And against those names, the only reparation Brennan would accept. Not tribute. He refused materials, territory, technology 3 times, to the visible distress of beings who had never before owed anything and ached to pay. What he took instead was this. The custody would carry the story. In its own deep archive, in the stratum reserved for load-bearing truth, in its own voice forever. An account of the night it pressed the dark against a young species' smallest boats, and what that cost, and why it must never be done again. Your archive outlives stars, Brennan told the keeper. Put them in it. That's the payment. When my whole species is a layer of rock, something will still know their names and what they were doing when the dark came for them. The keeper agreed, and then it asked permission, asked to add 1 figure of its own to the entry. We granted it sight unseen. Demir translated it on the shuttle home and read it to us over the intercom, and nobody on that boat said anything for the rest of the flight. The entry ends. They were carrying fire to strangers. The custody attests that this is what the 3rd kind of fire is for, and that it learned this too late for 2 of them, and in time for everyone else. There is 1 more hour aboard the Lantern that belongs in this account, because without it the Concord reads like our victory, and it was not that, and the keeper made certain we knew it was not that before any of us signed anything. Between the 10th session and the signing, the keeper asked, door voice, the request form between equals, that the human delegation come and see 1 thing, no agenda. The avenues of slow light carried us deeper into the Lantern than we had ever been taken, down into a stratum of the ship where the aurora dimmed and the lattice walls grew old, visibly old the way a mountain is old, the first thing of theirs we had ever seen that admitted to age, and into a vault the size of a city square, where the archive lives. I cannot describe the archive properly. Demir's book spends 40 pages failing better than I can. Say this. The custody does not write its history. It keeps its history alive, structured light, held in lattice, every load-bearing event in 100,000 years burning in place, dim and patient, like votive candles in a cathedral the size of a worldlet. The keeper carried us down 1 avenue of it, past lights Demir was forbidden to read, and stopped us before a region of the vault where there were no lights at all. A darkness, set in the middle of the memory, the size of a parade ground, bounded, deliberate, kept. This is the Hesh, the keeper said. They were old when the custody was young. That was the substance of the hour, told in light while we stood in the dark patch's presence. A burning species, brilliant and expansionist, the spiral arm's first great power, and the custody's first great teacher, and then its first great war. The war, as the keeper told it, beggared every number we brought to the room, centuries long, fought across the whole width of the arm, with fires. The phrase Demir could never gloss cleanly renders roughly as fires that ate the places where fire lives, that emptied 1,000 systems of the possibility of anything. The young custody won it in the only way left at the end. They built the first stilling, the great instrument their whole later law descended from, and they brought it down on the Hesh entirely, every ship, every world, every furnace and every lamp, and they never lifted it. The Hesh worlds are out there still, the keeper said. Dark in a way nothing else in the galaxy is dark, circling their suns in the silence of a sentence with no end. The custody keeps the darkness in its archive because the custody does not permit itself to forget what it is capable of, or what it cost to become the kind of power that would never have to do it twice. Every law you have strained against since we met you was written in this room, the Keeper said. We did not still 10,000 fires because we despise fire. We stilled them because we have seen what fire does when it answers to no one, and we swore upon the dark you are standing in front of that nothing would ever burn unanswerable again. And then your ship would not go dark, and our oath and our law looked at you and did not know your name. We have shown you this so that you will understand what you are asking us to live, without when you ask us to let fires walk free. We are not defending a privilege, we are guarding a grave. It was Brennan's worst hour, he told me years later. Standing in front of the only justification in the galaxy that was genuinely the size of the thing it justified, with the third clause of his Concord, the slow unleashing, the schedule with no sunset, sitting in the shuttle behind him, asking himself whether he was a young fool dismantling the dam that held back the only flood the universe had ever actually had. He did not answer the Keeper quickly. The transcripts show 4 minutes of human silence, which diplomats on both sides have since called the most eloquent thing any of us said aboard. Then he said, "Keeper, I will not stand at this grave and tell you your oath was wrong. I'll tell you what my species learned in its own dark, with its own graves, and you will weigh it, because weighing things is what you are for. We learned that a power that cannot be refused doesn't stay a guardian forever, no matter how it begins, not because it grows wicked, but because it stops being asked questions, and a strength that is never questioned forgets what it's a strength for. You have been alone with your oath for 100,000 years. Tonight you are not alone. Let the fires walk free slowly, under witness, on a schedule, and let the witness be mutual. Watch us forever, and we will watch you, and the grave you are guarding will have 2 guards at the price of 1 secret." He looked at the bounded dark for a moment. "And if my species ever builds a thing like the instrument that made this place, I want yours close enough and unafraid enough to tell us no. The Concord is how you get to keep saying it." The Keeper held its light still for a long time. Then it said, "We asked on the first day whose you were. We withdraw the question. It was never the right one. The right question is the one your captain has just answered. Whose is your strength for?" And it turned and carried us back up through the burning memory of its species toward the chamber with the human chairs, and the last thing it said before the avenues took us was entered at its own order into both archives at once. Let it be recorded that the young species stood before the quitting of the Hesh and grieved with the custody and was not afraid. The Concord may now be signed. We know at last what we are signing it with. The signing itself took 4 minutes. Ink for us, light for them, and Ulm's threefold seal for the witnesses, on a table the custody had made by hand, in a chamber grown for breath and gravity, 400,000 kilometers off a gas giant whose name on our charts was still a string of numbers. There were no speeches. Brennan had vetoed speeches with the full concurrence of every party, on the grounds, entered formally into the record, because the custody enters everything formally into the record, that the ships had already said it. The lantern departed the halberd system 31 days after it arrived, and it left the way it had come, slowly lit, in plain sight, a 41-kilometer courtesy, decelerating out of our lives across 19 hours so that every scope in the system could watch, the eldest moving thing in the galaxy choosing, for the second time, to be seen. The wardens went with it. The first ship, our cathedral, the mirror that had sat beside us in the dark, watching us sleep, was the last to go, and before it jumped, it turned its hull through 1 slow degree, toward us, and dimmed, 1 minute, ember low. Okafor logged it as a photometric event, Demmer logged it as a bow. They were both right, and that in the end is the whole discipline of first contact, learning to be both right at once. The Ished did not leave at all. Within a year, the numbered system had a name. The charts say Halberd Concord Station now, but every spacer human or otherwise calls it the Lamp Yard. And Ulm's people had built the first free port in the history of the spiral arm on the L4, point of the gas giant, a place where a hull under any flag could berth, bank, and bargain with no field above it and no permission beneath it. The first human reactor sold under the transition charter was installed on Ulm's own flagship by Park's people, with Rao supervising the mating flange personally because, he said, the first one was going to be done right or the whole future would inherit a bad weld. When they lit it, Ulm had the convoy sound its docking horns, 11 freighters and a flagship, the same 11, the same flagship, and the sound carried on the open work channels all through the anchorage, and the human crews stood in it like weather. I went back to the Lamp Yard 9 years later, as a captain myself by then, and the thing I am proudest to report is how ordinary it had become. Methane breathers arguing rates with human supercargos. A custody warden, they come now sometimes as guests. It is the strangest sight in the universe, and the dock workers are bored of it. Moored at the far trestle with its luminance dimmed to harbor, courtesy taking on of all the cargo in creation, chairs. Client species from lanes we hadn't even charted in Brennan's day, lined up at the charter office with petitions. The clerk who processes them works under a plaque with 2 names on it. Janik and Odom hold no rank there, need no explanation there. The petitioners touch the plaque when their fire is granted. Nobody taught them to. Some things translate without a lattice. The custody kept the Concord. I want that written plainly by someone who was in the room, because cynics of my own species predicted otherwise for 50 years and have been wrong for 50 years. Not one stilling has fallen on any hull, theirs, ours, or anyone's, since the bright pause. The pause never ended. Their jurists eventually amended the law to match it, which Demir says is how all great law actually works. Practice first, theology limping after. The frontier stayed a frontier and became a seam instead of a scar. And the schedule of the 3rd clause has held, lane by lane, species by species, each new charter witnessed by all 3 signatories, the way you let light into a room. What the custody is becoming now that it is not the only fire is not mine to say, that history belongs to beings whose lifespans can hold it. But I will report one thing. Demir, who spent the rest of his career as our permanent voice to the lantern, was asked once, by the keeper itself, whether humanity understood what had actually done at Halberd. Demir, being Demir, said, "We mostly thought we'd refuse to turn off our lights." And the keeper answered, "It's in his book, read his book, you did not refuse the dark for yourselves. Any proud species might have done that, and we would have waited out its pride. You refused it for strangers at cost on the first day we met you, before you knew whether we would forgive it. We have stilled 10,000 fires, and the only one that ever changed us is the one you handed across the cold with your own hands. That is what your species is. We have entered it in the archive. We do not expect you to live up to it always. We expect you to keep trying because we watched you do it once when no law required it, and a thing seen cannot be unseen." Saul Brennan died at home, at 91, with his collar unbuttoned 11 years after the Concorde bearing his fingerprints, stopped being a treaty and started being just the way the galaxy works. The custody sent a delegation to the funeral, the first time their kind ever stood under an open human sky, and when the honor guard fired the volley, the 3 custodians dimmed, 1 minute ember low in the sunlight where almost nobody could even see it. I saw it. I was carrying the flag. I have been given medals I remember less. People ask me at the academies, at the hearings, lately at the schools my grandchildren attend, where the Halberd contact is 4 pages in a textbook with 1 photograph, and the photograph is the freighter with its windows coming on. What the lesson is. They want the doctrine. Hold position, give mathematics, threaten no one, keep the ship. And that is all true, and it is all in the manuals, and it is not the lesson. Here is the lesson, from the last officer of that watch, still above ground, and then I am done. The galaxy we walked into was not a wilderness. It was a tended garden, 100,000 years old, safe and prosperous and quiet, and the price of it was a leash on every throat, worn so long that the wisest beings on 1,000 worlds could no longer tell the difference between peace and permission. Nobody in that garden was wicked, the gardener least of all. They had simply been strong for so long, and alone with their strength for so long, that they had forgotten the universe could produce another answer to the cold, and everyone beneath them had been kept so long they had forgotten anyone could stand outside the keeping. And then a heavy, ugly, redundant human warship, built by a species so young the custody's instruments at first refused to credit our carbon dating, sat in their oldest darkness with every light burning, and would not kneel and would not threaten and would not leave. And when the dark was pressed down on bystanders to make a point of them, that ship, and this is the part that did it, not the array, not the reactors, the histories on both sides agree, that ship sent its smallest boats out into the middle of the standoff with cables and shared. We did not outbuild the custody. On the day we met them, they could have ended us. Their own staff studies, declassified to us decades later under the honesty protocols of the Concorde, are unsentimental on the point. What we did was stranger and harder for them to survive. We showed them in one night between one watch and the next a kind of strength their whole long history had never priced in. Strength that did not require anyone else's weakness. Fire that did not require anyone else's dark. They had 100,000 years of proof that power means the ability to still. We stood there, lit, lighting others, taking losses, firing nothing, and proved that power can mean the refusal to. Against weapons, they had answers older than our species. Against that, they had only the truth, which is that they had been alone and lonely, and mistaken about what the light was for, and too honest, in the end, to keep pretending otherwise once somebody finally stood in front of them, burning with the evidence. The Ishad have a new proverb. Ulm's line coined it, and it has crossed 40 languages now, theirs and ours. It says, the dark is the oldest empire, and it fell to a species that would not stop paying its light bill. I laughed the first time I heard it, because I was there, and the truth is smaller and better than proverbs. The truth is a tired captain in an unbuttoned collar saying nobody touches a plot breaker. The truth is Park asking how many skids, not why. The truth is Ruiz's hand on a knife switch, and a row of yellow windows coming on in the universe's oldest night, and 2 names in an archive that will outlive the stars, filed under what fire is for. We were the first thing in 100,000 years that the dark could not silence. But that was only the fact of us. The meaning of us, the thing the custody actually met at Halberd. The thing I watched them realize across 55 minutes of stunned and ancient silence was that humanity had carried its own slight so long through its own long night that it had stopped being afraid of anyone else's darkness. And a species like that doesn't conquer the dark. It just keeps the lights on everywhere it goes until the dark has nowhere left to be.